Well, it's unlucky for some, but here we are in part 13 of this series, where we explore the history of Magic the Gathering by looking at cards from every set. This is an episode full of new beginnings, as we move into the era of the two-set block model. It's also a new beginning in terms of Magic's story. The Gatewatch arc begins here with the set Magic Origins. It then lurches around dazed and confused for a while in Battle for Zendikar block, before suddenly transforming into a cosmic horror story in Shadows Over Innistrad block. Whether you love the Gatewatch or hate them though, I hope you enjoy this episode.
Magic Origins started to arrive in stores in July 2015. Intended to serve as the final core set, though ultimately this was not the case, Magic Origins still served as the only core set released in 3 years, prior to the release of core set 2019 in July 2018. Overall, it was a pretty good set, especially for a core set, and a nice sort of send-off to the concept. Magic Origins identified the era which had plagued every prior core set. Sets which occur on planes always have a unique identity and storyline for players to follow along with. The adventure world being gradually invaded by Lovecraftian horrors, in the case of Zendikar, the factional world engulfed in civil war, as is the case in Ravnica, etc. Core sets, meanwhile, never really had such a cohesive character. They're just sort of a hodgepodge of creatures and spells from across the multiverse, with some planeswalkers tossed in without any real context. Magic Origins changed all that though, and marked the beginning of a new arc in Magic's storyline, the Gatewatch era. As its name would imply, Magic Origins serves as the origin story of the 5 members of the Gatewatch. Its cards depict notable characters from their past, like Gideon's childhood friends. Aww.
And a spell depicting Gideon's horrible guilt after he accidentally murders them all.
Oof. Jace's mentor turned foe, Alahammeret, and of course his most dastardly rival, the big kid who used to steal his lunch money. Many of the spells from this set also depict key moments from the lives of these characters. The moment Chandra's spark ignited, the moment Liliana sold her soul to 4 demons, and the moment Nissa realised the elves of Lorwyn were a little bit murdery for her tastes. Of course, if you mention Magic Origins to anyone, the first cards that will come to mind are the 5 double-faced Planeswalker cards. Each of the members of the Gatewatch have a low-cost creature card in this set, which, once a certain condition is met, flips over and becomes a Planeswalker. This represents how the Gatewatch members are just, regular everyday folks hanging out and having a good time, and then BAM! Something huge happens, and their spark ignites, turning them into a multiverse travelling Planeswalker. All 5 of these are really iconic and powerful cards. If you would ask me which of these cards is the best though, I'd say it's a toss-up between either Jace, Vryn's Prodigy, or Liliana, Heretical Healer. So since we've looked at 2 Jace cards in this series already, let's go with Liliana. Initially, Liliana starts as a 2/3 with lifelink for 3 mana, but then, when another non-token creature you control dies, you create a 2/2 zombie token and flip Liliana over to her Planeswalker side. Liliana, Defiant Necromancer. In the storyline, Liliana's spark awakens when she attempts to administer a potion to her sickly brother, which instead curses him and transforms him into a zombie. The front side of Liliana's card, in my opinion, perfectly captures this story beat, right down to Liliana having lifelink, representing her training in the healing arts. Her Planeswalker side, meanwhile, has the ability to resurrect dead creatures, because she's a Defiant Necromancer. Her +2 makes each player discard a card, which can work in your favour if you run a Madness or a Graveyard deck. She has a -X, which lets you bring a dead creature with converted mana cost X or less back from your graveyard into play, and her ultimate just puts every creature that dies straight from the graveyard into play under your control. So yeah, Magic Origins is probably one of the best core sets out there. It's much more exciting than all those which came before it, and it would set the character-focused tone for the core sets of the future. Battle for Zendikar came out in October 2015. Now, I know I usually open these with a bit more energy and with a slightly cheesy one-liner, so you were probably expecting me to say something like Battle for Zendikar charged into stores in October 2015, but no. Battle for Zendikar doesn't deserve a fun joke intro. I love Magic the Gathering. I think it's one of the greatest games that's ever been created, but Battle for Zendikar is it's really bad. When you ask most people to name the worst set in the game, the most common answers are Homelands and Fallen Empires, but considering those sets came out just a sliver before I was born, and in the earlier and more experimental years of Magic's life, I find it hard to be too mad at those sets. Battle for Zendikar, meanwhile, came out whilst I was very much alive, and at a stage in the game's history when the designers should have known better. So what exactly were the issues with Battle for Zendikar? Well, I've already made a video discussing its thematic failings, so I'll keep that brief here. Yes, I know. I've already promoted that video when we were looking at Rise of the Eldrazi. This is the last time I'll plug it, I swear. Essentially, whilst previously the Eldrazi had been these giant, unknowable cosmic horrors, the need to make them a faction in a war story meant they needed to be printed frequently throughout the set, at a variety of power levels and mana costs. This stripped them of their previous mystique, and just made them mundane and dull. On a mechanical level, the set also had issues. Green was infamously underpowered in Limited. This is probably a really strange thing to hear these days, considering green is widely considered to be one of the most pushed colours in the game. But green used to be considered the weakest of the game's colours, especially for Limited. Removal is a key ingredient in an effective Limited deck, and green has the game's worst creature removal. Now, this has been remedied in the present, as the number of creatures with Death Touch in green has been ramped up, and the quality of green's creature removal has been buffed. And the amount of card draw in green has also been brought up significantly. Probably too significantly, but hey-ho. So in any case, green used to be considered quite weak in Limited, and Battle for Zendikar was when it was at its weakest. The situation for green was so bad that some pros advocated abandoning the colour entirely.
The first thing I want to do, Luis, I want you to summarize the set in one sentence if you could. What would that sentence be?
Don't draft green. If I only got one sentence to tell someone something that would not only summarize the set but help them win Battle for Zendikar drafts, it would be don't draft green.
In fact, it wasn't just green that was weak. Previous sets like Tarkir had wound the power level of the game up, so Battle for Zendikar marked a conscious attempt to crank it back down again. This isn't bad in and of itself, but it did mean the set had very little impact on standard, and sets with low power levels tend to be less well received in general. So, that's 600 words complaining about Battle for Zendikar, but what card should I actually use to represent the set? I'm going to go with Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. So, as the Eldrazi attack Zendikar, the Plains populace come together to defend themselves. This is represented through the use of the Ally creature type. Interestingly, the Ally creature type had previously been used in the original Zendikar block to show how the plane was an adventure world, where brave heroes formed parties to handle problems. Now the mechanic returns, but in a new context. A number of allies in Battle for Zendikar come with the mechanic Rally, which basically means whenever you play another ally, a nice thing happens. In most instances, this nice thing is something like all of your creatures gaining ability or gaining a statistical bonus. This is pretty flavourful as a representation of everyone on the plane rallying together in the face of an alien threat, but also it's a bit unclear why some cards are allies and some cards aren't. For example, Zulaport Cutthroat depicts a balding middle-aged dude with a medieval chainsaw-style sword who rewards you for sacrificing your own creatures and has flavour text which is a joke about getting mugged, but yep, he's an ally. Stonehaven Mystic, meanwhile, depicts a cleric who in the artwork is healing one of his allies and has flavour text talking about how he tries hard to heal his allies, but nope, he's not an ally. But other than the distinction between who does and doesn't get to be an ally being arbitrary, it's a fun enough mechanic, and it's good to see it back in this new way. Allies wouldn't return in Zendikar Rising, which took Zendikar back to its adventurous roots, but represented adventuring parties through the use of the party mechanic rather than by using allies. It makes sense, I guess, but I do sort of miss them. Looping back around to Gideon then. He's a key component in ally decks, and he's still a pretty good planeswalker even if he isn't in one. His Zero ability lets him create a 2/2 core ally token. As the Rally ability is triggered whenever an ally enters play, you can use Gideon to trigger it reliably every single turn. His +1 is the standard Gideon effect that turns him into a big indestructible creature to attack your opponents, and his ultimate creates an emblem which gives all of your creatures +1/+1. Sort of like a glorious anthem that can't be removed because it isn't possible to interact with emblems. This may not sound that impactful, but as it only costs 4 loyalty, and Gideon starts with 4 loyalty, you can just slam him straight down and then activate the ability immediately. Oath of the Gatewatch came out in January 2016. Just like Battle for Zendikar, it doesn't get a fun intro. So, I spent a long time building up to the card that I used to represent Battle for Zendikar, so I'm just going to leap in and announce my card for Oath of the Gatewatch right now. It's Fort Knot Seer. Did you see that coming? I thought not. Alright, you may well have seen that coming, but I couldn't resist making that joke. Now, you might have noticed the shiny new diamond symbol in the top right corner of this card. What's that all about? Well, Oath of the Gatewatch give us a new basic land type, Wastes. The first new basic land brought into the game since Alpha. Wastes generate colourless mana. This was necessary as Oath of the Gatewatch also gave us several cards that can only be cast using colourless mana, as represented by this little diamond. This caused a bit of confusion, as it was a new concept introduced halfway through an ongoing block. So the way that cards that generated colourless mana looked changed in between 2 connected sets. I see what they were trying to do here, and this is far from the largest problem with Battle for Zendikar block, but I do just find it a bit of a shame. I think the old design that cards that generate colourless mana uses looks a bit cleaner, and it's a lot easier to explain to a completely new player than the current one. But yeah, what are you going to do? Wastes have only been seen again in Time Spiral Remastered and as cards on the list, which sometimes appear in set boosters. So, beyond the fact that it's got colourless mana and its casting cost, why did I choose Fortnightseer to represent this set? Well, it's a key component in the Eldrazi-centred decks which dominated Modern from January to April 2016, a period which earned the nickname Eldrazi Winter. The Eldrazi were a powerful threat that you could use to disrupt your opponent's hand through discard, using cards like the Seer here, as well as Reality Smasher, and then cards like Blight Herder and Drowner of Hope could be used to check out Scion tokens that could be sacrificed to bring bigger and badder Eldrazi into play. Now looking at these cards, you might be thinking, hang on a minute, how was this a deck? None of those cards cost less than 4 mana. How could you get them all out? And the answer to that rests in 2 cards from the original Zendikar block. Eldrazi Temple was a land which generates 1 mana or 2 mana if it was being used to pay for an Eldrazi card or activate the ability on an Eldrazi. And of course, there was the infamous card which enabled these decks more than any other, the Eye of Ugin. A legendary land which makes it so that all of your colourless Eldrazi spells cost 2 less to cast, and also lets you tutor up an Eldrazi for 7 mana in the late game. If you played an Eye of Ugin on turn 1, and then cast an Eldrazi Temple on turn 2, you could bring out a Fortnightseer on the second turn of the game, and then just keep spiralling into bigger and better threats from there. Eye of Ugin hadn't been so bad when the only Eldrazi in the game were the ones from Rise of the Eldrazi, but with the tribe getting a lot of extra support in Battle for Zendikar, and over the Gatewatch, it was evident the card was now a problem. Similarly, without the Eye of Ugin and Eldrazi Temple available in the format, Eldrazi decks were nowhere near as threatening in Oath of the Gatewatch era Standard as they were in Modern. Eye of Ugin was ultimately banned in Modern in April of 2016, bringing Eldrazi Winter to a close and Eldrazi decks back down to a suitable level of power in the format. You're still welcome to use the cards together in Commander though, and Eldrazi decks are very popular in the format, hence why Fortnightseer still commands a fair price, but they're not a tier 1 Modern deck anymore. It was on a dark and stormy night in April 2016 that Shadows Over Innistrad was unleashed upon the world. Okay, I'll turn it down a bit. So yes, Shadows Over Innistrad, deriving its name from the H.P. Lovecraft novella The Shadow Over Innsmouth, only with fewer fish people and much less xenophobia. Shadows Over Innistrad attempted to do something interesting with its structure. Most horror stories can be broadly split into 2 parts. In the first section, the protagonists exist in a seemingly mundane and ordinary world. Everything appears regular, but something isn't quite right, so they investigate. They scratch beneath the surface and they uncover something horrible. This transitions us into part 2. The calm facade is broken and the horrific nature of the world, or of the antagonist, is revealed. Shadows Over Innistrad attempted to mimic this structure using its 2 sets. Shadows Over Innistrad itself is a set all about investigating and looking for clues to find out what's going wrong, whilst Eldritch Moon is about the monstrous revelation that the Eldrazi Titan Emrakul has been corrupting the world and driving its residents into horrifying madness. Naturally, this concept is played with a little bit, as Innistrad was already a pretty horrifying place even before Emrakul came along, but broadly speaking, these are the tropes which Wizards of the Coast are attempting to emulate with the structure of Shadows Over Innistrad block. To reflect how Shadows Over Innistrad represents the ordinary before it gives way to the unknown, its draft environment is structured similarly to the original Innistrads. All 5 allied colour pairs have tribal synergies, using the same tribes as in the original Innistrad. That's white/blue spirits, blue/black zombies, black/red vampires, red/green werewolves, and white/green humans. Whilst the 5 enemy colour pairs had slightly looser mechanical themes, like black/green delirium, blue/green investigate, and red/white aggro. So, the gameplay from Shadows Over Innistrad is similar to the original, but its cards are a lot cheaper. It's a more affordable Innistrad, if you will. In fact, I actually own a Shadows Over Innistrad cube for this very reason. Building an Innistrad cube would be stupidly expensive because of all the premium cost cards. Liliana of the Veil, Snapcaster Mage, and Parallel Lives alone set you back over $200. Meanwhile, nothing in Shadows, at the time of recording, costs more than $12. So if you're looking to get a similar experience to the original Innistrad, but don't have all the money to shell out, Shadows Over Innistrad's sealed product is still really cheap. The set probably isn't quite as good as the original, but it's still really fun. So I've talked here about the broader themes. What card am I actually going to go with to represent the set? Let's go with Tireless Tracker. As I mentioned, investigation was a key theme of the set, as is evidenced by the investigate mechanic. Well, I say mechanic. Really, all investigate means is make a clue token. Clue tokens are artifacts that can be sacrificed for 2 mana in order to draw you a card. Tireless Tracker is by far the most famous card with investigate, and it's probably the most powerful as well. Tireless Tracker is a 3/2 for 3 mana, which gets you a clue token whenever you play a land. It also gets a +1/+1 counter, so Tireless Tracker can get you a steady stream of card draw as the turns go by. It also negates the bad feeling of late game land drops, because those land drops can be played down to give you a clue token and let you draw again until you reach something more useful. The fact that it also becomes a gradually increasing threat, even if it doesn't have any form of evasion by default, is also a neat bonus. After Shadows Over Innistrad, the investigate mechanic and clue tokens disappeared for a number of years. Clue tokens have always been consistently popular amongst custom Magic card designers, who were constantly making new Investigate cards in this time. With the release of Modern Horizons 2 in June of 2021, the Investigate mechanic finally returned to the game. We even got an Investigate commander in the form of Lonis, Cryptozoologist. Modern Horizons 2 also gave us a card which serves as a callback to Tireless Tracker, Tireless Provisioner, which is an exceedingly similar card, except whenever you play a land it gives you a treasure or a food token instead. There are a few other differences, in that the Provisioner is an elf rather than a human, and it doesn't gain the +1/+1 counters that the Tracker does, but the fact that it was an homage to the Tracker that was printed 5 years ago demonstrates that Tireless Tracker is a memorable card and a fan favourite. The sun dipped beneath the horizon as an Eldritch Moon rose in July 2016. As I mentioned above, Eldritch Moon is the climax of Shadows Over Innistrad block. The investigation is over, and the horrific ways in which Emrakul has warped the plane are now visible for all to see. The artwork in Magic the Gathering is always fantastic, but Eldritch Moon absolutely knocked it out of the park. This is absolutely the most unnerving and horrifying set that's ever been put to print, and the art team deserves full credit for beautifully capturing the uncomfortable body-warping horror of the Eldritch Horror genre. In previous Innistrad sets, cards which transformed had two faces, one featuring the sun and another depicting the moon. The transforming cards of Eldritch Moon, meanwhile, with one lone exception, have their front faces showing the moon and their back faces showing Emrakul. This shows how things are going from bad to worse, and how the already horrifying creatures of Innistrad are becoming twisted in an even more grotesque manner by the influence of Emrakul. The mastermind of all this madness, Emrakul the Promised End, has a brilliantly powerful and flavourful card which allows you to control your opponent during their next turn. This is the perfect representation of how her magic is controlling the plane's populace and driving them to madness. Not only was she sealed in the moon in the story, but she was also banned and sealed away from standard as well, as cards from Kaladesh like Aetherworks Marvel made her castable way faster than intended. She won't be the card I'll be using to represent the set, however, partially because I've already used Emrakul the Aeon's Torn to represent Rise of the Eldrazi, and partially because I want to use my pick from this set to highlight the meld mechanic, one of the most weird and unique mechanics that Wizards of the Coast have ever created. Eldritch Moon features exactly 6 cards that can meld. These cards can be sorted into 3 groups of 2. When they're both on the field together, the 2 separate cards are able to merge into one. You flip them over, and their reverse sides each have half a card on them. You push these 2 halves together, and they merge into one giant card. Graph Rats and Midnight Scavengers become Chittering Host. Bruna the Fading Light and Gisela the Broken Blade merge to become Brisella, Voice of Nightmares, a card with artwork so horrifying I'm actually not going to show it in this video because it's complete nightmare fuel. So well done, Clint Silly, you've officially drawn the creepiest art in the game. This brings us to the card we're going to use to represent the set. First, you play the land Hanvir Battlements. It provides colourless mana, and you can cast a red and tap it down in order to give a creature haste. Then you play Hanvir Garrison, a 2/3 for free that generates 2 1/1 human tokens to attack alongside it whenever it attacks. If you ever have both of these creatures on the field at the same time, you can pay 5 mana and tap the battlements down in order to merge them together into Hanvir, the Writhing Township. A 7/4 with Trample and Haste, it generates 2 attacking 3/2 Eldrazi Horror tokens whenever it attacks. I honestly couldn't tell you if it's cheating or not to have Hanvir the Writhing Township as my card of a set. Is it 1 card or 2? I mean, it's 1 card made of 2 other cards, but only 1 permanent. Whatever the case, Meld is an incredibly unique mechanic, and I wanted to highlight that here with my choice. Innistrad has always broken new grounds using the backside of cards to represent transformation and change, a trend which will hopefully continue in the 2 Innistrad sets which are coming along in the near future. I also just have a personal soft spot for this card, because Eldritch Moon is a set which is very bleak, and it's oozing with doom and gloom, and this provides some, admittedly, very dark humour. The flavour text of Hanvir Garrison reads, "We're ready for anything!" Yeah. No, they weren't. So there you have it. What a weird coincidence that I covered Magic's most terrifying set in episode 13. I am of course referring to Eldritch Moon there, because it's a horror story, not Battle for Zendikar, which is just horrible. Join me next time as we take a huge trip all across the multiverse. We'll be starting on Kaladesh, an artifact plane which follows in Mirrodin's footsteps by being absolutely busted. Then we move on to Amonkhet, a graveyard set based around Egyptian mythology. Then we move on to Ixalan, a world of dinosaurs, merfolk and pirates, oh my, before finally coming to rest back where Magic began on the plane of Dominaria. I'll see you all next time.